Why don't I hear Russians complaining about their dead, missing men? I did the math. Do you often hear from Russians in general? The ones that complain publicly often get a free extended tour of Russia's criminal justice system. Are you a Russian on a Russian media? Deaths are mentioned on Russian media and it is mentioned in Russian. Yes, the huge public outrage is not happening and that is topic of another conversation. But you asked why you are not hearing about it and this would be my answer. Russia is big on censorship. Anyone who speaks against the war, which includes casualties, risks being arrested. Let me tell you a joke. I asked a Russian friend, "How's life?" He said, "Can't complain." Russian women have been complaining about their missing men for years. Not just in the Ukraine war, but in other conflicts. And also just deaths, disappearances during non-conflict military service, training. Russian here. 1. Majority of Russian troops near the front line at this point are professionals, not conscripts. So, most casualties aren't just regular people. 2. Professional armed forces serve as a social lift to an extent. So, many soldiers are from poorer regions. Recent mobilization disproportionately affected those regions as well. And it's not like 60Y. Woman from some godforsaken Siberian village is likely to write posts on Reddit. 3. Propaganda. Russian media speak about less Russian casualties than Western media. Conversely, Russian propaganda of course exaggerates Ukrainian casualties while the West diminishes them. The truth is likely somewhere in between. Maybe you haven't noticed, but rich, powerful Russians who complain about the war suddenly fall out of windows. What do you think would happen, does happen to an average Russian? How many people do you know? How many of them would you be okay with dying? Anyone in Russia who complains about the war to international news can face retaliation from their government, so that's why we barely hear from those family members. The death of one man is a tragedy, the death of 1,000 men is a statistic. They do on VK. But most killed are from rural areas. Ethnic Russians are drafted last. Those Russians who are able to leave and state an opinion against the war absolutely do complain about it. Those living in Russia can be arrested and jailed for saying anything negative about Putin or the war. Before doing the maths, did you actually read about the state of censorship and persecution of dissidents in Russia? Casualty equals Kia. Because if anyone complains about their loved ones dying and questions whether or not the special military operation is worth it, they get arrested. Of course people do complain and do ask such questions. But the threat of government retaliation keeps others quiet beyond state-sponsored mournings. The Russian public lives in a highly censorious environment in which they must simultaneously deny that there is a war, while also expressing support for it. Anyone who says the wrong thing risks jail or just being disappeared. The same reason we don't hear pretty much anything about the war from Russians' criticism of the government is heavily censored. Some of the very first news stories I saw concerning the war were Russian citizens speaking out against it, but that very shortly was stopped, probably by both the Russian and the American press. Russia doesn't want to seem weak. The American press wants to make Russia look as bad as possible. The families don't hear about it either. They are listed as MIA or deserters or still in training. That way the government doesn't have to pay them. That's a fair question. Though I think that one thing we very much take for granted is the ability to say whatever dumb thing that comes to mind in Western civilization. I see a lot of room for casualty estimates to be invalid, and I also see a lot of room for the people of Russia to lack viable options to make use of said statistics. A very important point to consider is that the entire world knew about and was discussing the Chernobyl disaster in headlines before the people of the USSR were aware that it happened. It was actually years before they officially acknowledged it. The people and the government are two wholly separate entities. The USSR was also famous for making fake maps of their regions purely for the purpose of potentially misleading would-be invaders. Finally, if ever there was a claim made by Russia, it most assuredly is only vaguely connected to truth, at best immediately before the invasion of Ukraine. We warned the people that an invasion was imminent, and the USA was accused of giving into hysterics. We can just imagine what their political spin factories are generating out there, and we can be very sure that there are no alternative takes allowed in news. The truth is that, assuming the numbers were indeed fake, it wouldn't even matter what number we invented for their casualty estimates. It would still be more believable than anything they say.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.